Welcome to our ND Community Podcast. I'm Catherine and I'm a mother to 3 autistic ADHD daughters.
My name is Lorna and I'm a mother to an autistic son. We are going to be exploring stories and resources around lived ND experiences here in Guernsey. This podcast, a wonderful Laura Spence is talking to us, and we are talking about all things around hormones and ADHD and neurodivergence and how that kind of has an impact on those demographics. So, Laura, can we have a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So, as you kindly introduced me, I am the wonderful Laura Spence. Laura Spence is fine for the purposes of today. And I qualified as a midwife in 2013. I guess I probably always struggled with my mental health through my teenage years and certainly when I became a mother for the first time. I've got 3 children. I've got a 16-year-old, a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, and my daughter is Jodie, who has just turned 16, and she is autistic. She's learning disabled, and she has lots of physical health conditions as well. So she has epilepsy, she's a recent diagnosis of Crohn's disease, she's hypermobile, dyslexic, dyspraxic, I believe, although trying to get a diagnosis or access support for any of those things on island is very challenging. And also trying to get her assessed and potentially diagnosed with ADHD is proving probably the most difficult challenge, because there's that kind of the diagnostic overshadowing of her autism leads education and other healthcare providers to believe that everything is just related to her autism. However, I have ADHD. A lot of what I see in Jodie at home is related to ADHD.
And there's a huge overlap between the two.
Absolutely, yep. And I think there's more and more research coming out that seldom do the two things come on their own in isolation.
I mean, I've seen a statistic just this week saying that if you've got a diagnosis of autism, then you're 40% more likely to also have an ADHD diagnosis as well.
Yeah.
So I just think sometimes it depends where you sit on the spectrum. Sometimes that's really obvious, like you can separate the two and you can kind of look at the autistic traits and the ADHD traits. But depending on where you kind of sit on the spectrum, sometimes those lines get a little bit blurred.
Yeah, and I guess though the learning, her level of comprehension, it's really difficult to know how much is related to know, like her ability to understand and process things, and what is to do with her neurodivergence, because not everybody that's autistic is considered learning disabled and vice versa. I think about 50% of those who are autistic will also be learning disabled, so it's not necessary that the two things go hand in hand, but I think it must, certainly from an assessment diagnostic point of view, it must be really difficult. For example, we went to secondary mental health services to get her assessed for ADHD, and she was about to do the computerised test, and she was really struggling to even comprehend what they were asking her to do. And it is, for me, it seems like quite a simple task, just to, when you see X, you press the space button. I think she thought she was under some kind of almost like exam pressure. It was going to be a pass or a fail. And she attempted it for about 20 seconds, and she, quite magnificently threw her chair back in a fit of rage. She kind of gestured towards me and said, "Come on, we're going!" And then I just kind of had to look at, me and the woman looked at each other for about 15 seconds. And I was like, oh, okay, so we're away now. And I had to go traipse round about Cams to try and find where she was. And she was just sitting sulking out in the corridor. Now, to me, that seems diagnostic enough that she couldn't, but I guess then it's her level of comprehension. What did she understand about the test, and how accurate would it be if you've got somebody that's learning disabled? So when we went back for sort of our feedback, the gist of what I was getting fed in that appointment was that we don't have enough information, therefore she doesn't have it. But actually the professional who I spoke to very kindly said, we don't have enough information, therefore I'm not going to sit here now and tell you. That's kind of what the multidisciplinary team's idea is, that she doesn't have it. But what I'm telling you is we need more information. There is a specific test called the QB test that they can do for people. It's meant to be more accurate for people who are autistic and learning disabled to be assessed for ADHD. So why are we not investing to have that here?
Yeah.
Because surely the overlap is great enough that we can justify that in terms of money, but...
Do you ever find that with your daughter, with Jodie, that because she's got a diagnosis of, you said it yourself, she's autistic and she's got other comorbid diagnosis with that as well, that people just think you want another label and what's the point and what's this going to change? So she is ADHD or she isn't. What's it actually going to change for Jodie?
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that is the case. But having grown up myself without the correct label, because labels give us care instructions, don't they? And if you don't have the label, you kind of are just wandering aimlessly. And at least, I mean, I would have described it that when I received my diagnosis and kind of got my head around what that meant for me, I was able to reflect back on everything that's ever happened in my entire life, for it all to piece together and make sense. It's as if somebody handed me the correct instruction manual, because I was working off the wrong one this whole time and just always felt a bit outside of myself, outside of peers, etc. Really struggled with why I reacted in certain ways that I did, or why I felt huge rejection sensitivity when someone criticised me. But I understand all of that now, and it makes me feel less broken. And certainly hormones have a huge role to play. So for 3 weeks out of the month, I am one person, and for that 4th week out of the month, I'm a completely different person. So, for example, up to about 83% of those who are either ADHD or autistic would meet the criteria for a diagnosis of premenstrual dysphoria disorder. Things like Polycystic Ovary Syndrome are far more common in autistic and ADHDers. In fact, one study that I looked at as part of my master's suggests that people who have children who have a diagnosis of Polycystic Ovary Syndrome should access early intervention services for their offspring, because they're so much more likely to have a child with ADHD that it should automatically mean that they can get assessment and access to support much earlier on in that child's life than just having to wait and see, because the correlation is so high. I would say though, what that study didn't account for is whether it's the PCOS and the imbalance of the hormones that causes the ADHD, or whether we have a parent, a mother, who is undiagnosed because of the huge bias in the research historically being around white male children. And that certainly gives one presentation of ADHD, but we know for women that it can present very differently. So it didn't account for that sort of element within that study. It's just that I guess we need to consider whether it's a hereditary genetic component that's being fed through, or whether it's the imbalance of the hormones that's triggering something to create.
And with PMDD, is it something that as soon as you start having your periods, it's going to start, or does it develop more throughout your teenage years and then into your 20s?
I think potentially. So if we think about the points where lots of women are getting diagnosed at certain hormonal stages in their life, it's going to vary from person to person. But the key stages where females are tending to be, it's more common for them to be diagnosed, is when they hit puberty, postnatally, and into kind of perimenopause, menopausal stages.
Diagnosed neurodivergent?
Yes,
yeah.
Whether that's autism or ADHD.
So you've got all these women, neurodivergent women, of which a high percentage are going to have PMDD and various other things, trying to learn at school, trying to work at work, trying to raise children, whilst for 25% of their time they're feeling pretty shit. And how well known is that in the medical? It's not.
Not that well known, unfortunately. I think it's certainly gaining traction, I think, as we see more and more studies being released. But I certainly don't think it's well known about within the kind of gynecological world. But I can see huge potential for, better collaborations amongst, for example, multidisciplinary teams of mental health services and gynecology. That if someone, and I don't know why we're not doing it already, but if somebody has received a diagnosis of premenstrual dysphoria disorder from either a GP or a gynecological investigation point of view, why they're not automatically being referred to secondary mental health services for further investigation and support around their mental health. And I understand that services are probably already overwhelmed, but that's because a lot of people are getting to crisis point before they're actually able to receive, you know, that earlier intervention for support.
And maybe people, if you've got a neurodivergent girl in teenage years who's really struggling, maybe they need to automatically be thinking about that sort of thing.
Yes, absolutely. It should be a trigger point for referral into further services. But I'm a huge believer that if you have the information and the education, and that you understand your own physiology and how hormones are impacting your life, that for that 4th week out of the month where, you know, you feel like a completely different person. I mean, because when it comes to, it catches me by surprise every single month, and I think, right, well, whereabouts am I in my cycle? Oh, that's why I feel as if I want to jump into the sea from a very high bridge, or, you know, automatically for the person that I was 3 weeks previous to that, I question all of my life choices and think, where has that person gone that I was 3 weeks ago, where I felt as if I was smashing life and I could take on this, that and the next thing. And
so if you've got to sit an exam in that week?
Yeah, it's really difficult. So if I explain, just for some of the listeners, it might sound really complicated, but I'll give it my best shot. That if we think about the typical 28-day menstrual cycle, so this doesn't account really for people who maybe are on various forms of contraception. This is for somebody who's not on any contraception, they're not having any additional hormones to balance things out. But in a typical person who menstruates every 28 days. So day 1, you start bleeding. Within that next 2 weeks, we're kind of seeing an increase in estrogen levels. Now, estrogen and dopamine work hand in hand. So if your estrogen level is high, then your dopamine level is going to be high, and therefore you feel great. Dopamine is our happy hormone, and it helps us with our executive function, which incorporates not just administrative tasks and organisation, but it also helps us with our emotional regulation. So if our estrogen level is high, therefore our dopamine level is high for the first 2 weeks of our cycle. Then we ovulate, typically within maybe day 10 to day 14. Now, once we have ovulated, our estrogen level starts to decline, which is the latter 2 phases of our menstrual cycle. So possibly for week 3, you might be starting to feel a little bit kind of tired, but still okay. You know, you're not too far away from the self that you were within the first 2 weeks. As you then gradually go into week 4 and your estrogen level is dropping even further, so is your dopamine level, which means therefore it's having, it impacts anybody's mood, whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical. But the research shows us that neurodivergent women feel the hormonal fluctuation far more severely than a neurotypical woman does. Okay. And so if you can imagine then the mood decrease, the energy decrease, the kind of wanting to retreat to your bed, feelings possibly of being suicidal, all of those things are not uncommon amongst neurodivergent females.
We know that the diagnosis rate increases, don't we, in puberty, in pregnancy or post-pregnancy?
Post-pregnancy.
And in perimenopause, menopause, yeah?
So I think it's probably a lot to do with the environment that you're in. So you might have, it just seems to be becoming more apparent when there is that hormonal fluctuation. So for example, for females, typically we're far better at masking, we adapt, we tend to people please, and that's how we sort of get by because we're appeasing and we're agreeable. However, in that, during those hormonal fluctuations, our ability to cope is far reduced.
But then we're more likely to meet the diagnostic criteria that's been set for men.
Yes, exactly, yeah. However, I believe that there are changes coming to the diagnostic process, but obviously these things take a very long time. In pregnancy, so if we apply the same theory around the hormones into pregnancy, in the latter 2 trimesters, so trimester 2 and 3 of pregnancy towards the end, our hormone levels are far more stable, they're more consistent, and so therefore what we might see during those, and this won't apply to everybody of course, but what we might see is that any symptoms that we might have been having or feeling overwhelmed with are actually a lot more stable during pregnancy. But what we see is a far sharper drop once the baby is born and the placenta comes out. There's a very sharp drop of estrogen and all of those pregnancy hormones. So therefore, we'll see a sharp drop in that dopamine as well, which means we are going to see a massive increase very quickly, a sharp increase of any symptoms of your neurodivergence that you might have been struggling with, on top of recovering from a birth, recovering from all of the psychological aspects of having a baby. You're also now not sleeping well because you're up feeding a baby. You have all of, pregnancy is a very sensory, stimulating experience. There's lots of things happening, lots of changes in your body, in your brain, and it's a lot to cope with. You're kind of transitioning into this new person that you weren't before, having to keep this little person alive, but also navigate all of those societal expectations, which I think typically for neurodivergent women is not easy to do because we don't tend to want to conform. So we have all of those societal expectations around what it looks like to be a good mother that you're sort of battling with. You might have the midwife coming around, the health visitor coming around, and typically after you've had a new baby, your house is not looking at its best and you have fear of judgment, and so you might have this element of perfectionism that you're trying to achieve and stay on top of, and a lot of it is kind of self-inflicted because we think that we need to meet these neurotypical achievements. Often we're being judged by neurotypical standards within healthcare.
Want to fit in, right?
Exactly. And so actually, for a lot of neurodivergent mothers, it's too much to cope with.
So presumably there are more neurodivergent mums diagnosed with postnatal depression.
Exactly, and not necessarily correctly either. They might be diagnosed with postnatal depression instead of having a look at the whole picture holistically. Of course, if you throw breastfeeding into the mix, then again, that's it can be a very sensory, overwhelming experience. Some people might absolutely love it, but some people maybe can't stand it, but push through it anyway for, again, the pressure of wanting to do what's best for your baby. But we're far more likely, so there is a connection between premenstrual dysphoric disorder and postpartum psychosis. So therefore, what does that mean? If we see that up to 83% of neurodivergent women would meet the criteria for a diagnosis of PMDD, does that mean that neurodivergent women are more likely to be those women who experience postpartum psychosis? I don't know the answer to that. The research is not there, but it is a question that I have. If we were to cut out the middleman, then surely that must mean that we are more likely to experience those things in the postpartum period.
And what's the treatment for that?
Usually the situation, now I've not worked in maternity services in Guernsey for over 2 years now, but usually, obviously, they would be referred into secondary mental health services, and that's then their expertise. But I believe it would be treatment with antipsychotics if that was appropriate. And sometimes people have to go off island and go into a mother and baby unit where they have that kind of more therapeutic approach and lots of support round about helping them to care for their baby until they are recovered enough to then come back. And unfortunately, it's like that across the whole of the UK because mother and baby units are oversubscribed. There's not enough of them. Quite often it's a bit of a postcode lottery that lots of families, not just those who live on islands, but lots of families are having to travel hundreds of miles to access very specialised care. Now, thankfully, it doesn't happen to a lot of people. It's like not even 1%, I don't think, is the statistic. So it's not something certainly that we see very often, but it is something that's, I would say, is a very serious kind of crisis. The other thing is that if we look at the Embrace report, which is a triennial report that comes out and it looks at why mothers die relating to, within the first 12 months after having a baby. And for the last 3 reports, I think, within that period of 6 weeks postnatal and 12 months, suicide has been the leading cause of why mothers die within that first 12 months after having a baby.
Gosh.
What the statistics are not looking at yet is there a relation to an undiagnosed neurodivergent mother who is, getting to the stage where she's absolutely desperate and she has then died by suicide. The statistics are not putting it together, but if we think about these statistics in isolation, 1 out of 4 ADHD adult females will attempt suicide at some point in their life. So that's 25% of ADHD female adults. That's the ones that we know about that have a diagnosis. What about the ones that don't? The ones that feel broken, the ones that feel the way that I've felt my entire life, just sitting outside of society? Because quite quickly, once you have a baby, you run out of your ability to cope. And I have heard stories from mothers who have said to me, I've gone to the GP, and this is not isolated to Guernsey, this is nationwide. This is women from all over the world that have told me these stories around them trying to access support, thinking that they might be autistic, thinking that they might have ADHD. They go and see a GP after, maybe thinking about it for 2, 3, 4 years, sometimes not even having spoken to their partner, to any of their family about it, for a GP to then turn around and say, oh, I know what this is. This is another case of tired mummy syndrome. You need to go home, run a bath and watch some Netflix and you'll be fine. Or, welcome to motherhood. What is this, just the expectation now that this is just it, this is what women need to put up with. This is just what it's like to be a mother. It's not the case. And so can you imagine what an impact that has when that's the attitude that you're met with when you're going in to speak to a healthcare professional, to ask for help, for them to then validate all of your worst fears that actually it's just all in your head. It's medical gaslighting, it's misogyny,
And actually, it stops you seeking help.
Exactly, it stops you from asking. So you just then continue to suffer in silence, and I am pretty sure then your risk of mental health adversity is rapidly increased.
Do you know, when our 3 were very young, so I had 3 under 5, I remember going to the GP. I just wasn't coping very well, going to the GP in tears, and their response was, well, we can take you to a safe place. Well, you can imagine I just never went back.
Yeah. And of course there's a lot of stigma around admitting that you're struggling for help, because the first place your mind goes, they think that I can't look after my children, and therefore are they going to take my children away?
Yeah, because now I know I had 3 autistic ADHD daughters under 5. So the chances of me also having some neurodivergence is very high, and all of that. But at the time, it was early 2000s. So
yeah, it's only just coming into, we're allowing women to be considered neurodivergent. There's a lot of missed opportunities, I think, for people. And then when we look at what happens in menopause, obviously your hormones are fluctuating all over the place. And of course that's another intersection of where women are being diagnosed. So there might be a lot of thought out there amongst others in society, oh, here's another person with a diagnosis of ADHD or some kind of neurodivigent. It's so trendy. No, it's not a trend. It's just that women have been in the back foot this whole time.
Oh, so we're just catching up.
Exactly. We've been in our overdraft and we're now just bringing it up to a level playing field. And I just, I just would recommend that anybody that considers it, absolutely go and seek help in whatever way, shape or form. I do run a local support group on the last Tuesday of every month in the library.
Awesome.
And that's from 6 o'clock till 8 o'clock. We also have a WhatsApp group, so in between times there are some kind of social events that happen, the girls meet up for coffee or a sea swim or whatever that might look like, but they're always very good at giving each other support, which is, hugely admirable, but always very welcoming to newcomers. Don't ever feel shy coming along.
So actually, if somebody's been to their GP and maybe hasn't got the help that they were hoping to get, you guys would be a really good port of call.
Yeah, because that's the thing, you don't need to have a diagnosis formally. You can self-identify and that's perfectly valid. Some people are having to, access private assessments because they're not being taken seriously by the public sector.
But sometimes the waiting list as well is just so long. Absolutely. And as you said, like with your daughter, sometimes you go along to do the test and it's just, you just can't do it on the day. No. For what reason, you can't do it on the day. And then you are classed as not having a diagnosis, even though you probably feel yourself that actually I tick all those boxes. It was just on that particular day, at that particular time, I wasn't able to articulate what I needed to articulate to get that diagnosis.
Yeah, exactly.
So therefore, the access to any support may be available to you, it's not available to you anymore.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing I was going to say was that, as much as I love to celebrate all of the qualities that my daughter has, it can't go unsaid how difficult it is to parent a neurodivergent or learning disabled child, especially when you yourself are essentially a dysregulated neurodivergent parent. It is hugely overwhelming, and the day-to-day tasks that essentially I tend to balance with a lot of humour, because a lot of it is, I think if somebody was a fly on the wall in this house, it would make for a great documentary. But sometimes it really makes me sob, because I think, why is it not easier? You know, you manage, not to say that you're thriving at all, but you're surviving. Yeah. It's when you have to then go into a healthcare setting and try and advocate for your child, an education setting and try and advocate for your child, where there are professionals who think they know better, or don't take you seriously, or dismiss your concerns. And actually the next statistic that I'll tell you about is probably not a huge surprise, but there was recently a study came out of Birmingham University, I think, and up to 43% of parent carers, so those parents who care for their child, whether that's a physical disability or a cognitive or a learning disability, up to 43% of those parents have made plans to end their own life, which is a frightening statistic. But also up to 80% of those families will end up getting divorced because it puts such a huge strain on your relationship. And I think there's not enough education out there, especially for fathers who are trying to understand their neurodivergent teenagers, or particularly their female teenagers. It's a hugely complex situation, and I don't know about what either of you have found about post-diagnostic support is very, very minimal. Apart from support groups like Autism and Me or ADHD and Me.
Support?
Exactly.
It's parent-to-parent support, isn't it?
Yes.
Really.
And actually that's hugely powerful.
Yeah.
But also we could be doing better from the services
Whenever
point
we
of view.
tried to access some help through services, we were just told, well, you're doing so well. I'm like, well...
Because I've got no choice.
Yeah, and actually I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
And I think as well, what tends to be said is it's not the child that's broken, it's the system.
Yeah.
And it definitely is the system that's
Hugely.
broken.
Yeah.
Because parents, carers seem to advocate so much, and you take so much energy and time advocating for your child to get them the services that they need, that you are then depleted yourself.
Yeah.
And your energy levels and your drive and your motivation just starts to absolutely spiral.
Yeah.
And you think, why does it have to be this hard? Surely, it's really clear that we have a need here to look after this child, to make sure they have access to services that they need to just get by. I'm not, as you said, we're not talking about thriving here. We're talking about just getting by sometimes.
Exactly.
And yet, the fight for that seems to be constant. It seems to be constantly trying to justify why you either need a diagnosis or why you need the aftercare that your child needs just to get by.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if a lot of the battles that people have is what leads to poor mental health in looking after someone who has a disability.
There was some research published in April in the Frontiers of Psychiatry, and it was talking about school distress actually, but it was talking about the impact of school distress on the parents, and it said just how devastating it is for the parents as well as the children, and how there's a culture out there of parental blame still.
Oh, hugely. And it absolutely terrifies me listening to parents who I know have had to take their children out of school. They've faced, referrals to social services, they've had mass referrals, they sit in meetings with the school where the parent is blamed, it's your anxiety, it's the way that you parent, I recommend that you go in this parenting course and that parenting course. It's hugely gaslighting and hugely damaging and traumatising for a lot of these parents. Not to mention things like PDA, so pathological demand avoidance, and a lot of these things are not recognised on island. We don't have the specialists to be able to assess and diagnose. So what are people forced to do? It's not that it doesn't exist here, it does, because it maybe doesn't affect as high a percentage of people. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be supporting that. We should. And
actually, again, what it does is isolate you.
Absolutely, yeah. And then, of course, I was reading in a BBC News article today about how they're trying to scrap the EHCPs in England, and trying to bring back those who are home educated back into the mainstream school system. That's hugely frightening when, it's been a saviour to take these children out of school, because it's been so traumatising and damaging to these children. It's saved their lives by taking them out.
Absolutely. Actually, school is we said in different podcasts, wasn't it? School is the trauma event. The safeguarding issue.
And actually, isn't it more of a safeguarding risk to continue sending your child to a situation where they find it overwhelming and traumatising than to remove your child from the school?
And they're not going to learn.
Exactly. How are we expecting them to thrive when they are persistently in fight or flight?
Yeah.
I think that, and I don't know how the systems, if anyone's listening that belongs to any of these systems, I don't know how it gets fixed, but something needs to be going on behind the scenes. There needs to be some kind of resolution to this, because I don't know.
They were talking about on BBC Radio 4. Now I'm over 50, see, I listen to
BBC Radio 4. No more Radio 1 for you.
This morning, interviewing some government minister in the UK, talking about how they're going to help the mental health and school kids in the UK by having access to all these new mental health nurses and blah, 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 but get them into school, we know it's good for mental health, got to get them into school. And I thought, yeah, but if you actually look at the statistics of who is not in school, a very high percentage of those are neurodivergent. Yeah. It's not the right environment for many of those children.
We looked at a statistic before, and I think it said 92% of those who are not non-school attenders are actually neurodiverse.
Yeah. Something like that, yeah.
It was like 92% up in the 90s. That says everything, really.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So if we just bring it back to hormones and people being neurodivergent, what support can they access here on Ireland?
They can come and see us at Choices, just to push that there. So when I left midwifery a couple of years ago and had my own diagnosis, I started working in Choices, and I just absolutely love it there. I can't describe how nurturing the team is.
So what do they offer? Because I'm not aware.
So we offer contraceptive services, we offer sexual health screening. You can access it at any age. I think sometimes there's an impression that you can only access it if you're under 21, but actually we support females and males all the way through their kind of sexual.
But also for hormone health.
Absolutely, hormone health, and we can provide education if someone wants to come in for a consultation. We can adapt the service. I do tend to find that I will take the opportunity. If someone is coming in saying to me, I've got Polycystic Ovary Syndrome, I've got premenstrual dysphoria disorder, etc., any of these things, I, rightly or wrongly, will say, did you know that there is actually a connection between X and Y here? You might want to look into this for yourself, and if that fits, then this is how you can kind of look to get additional support, but maybe look at signpost them to other things, maybe usually online. Support groups or just pages that they can follow that talk about these things to help them feel less alone, because there are pages out there that do exist that are talking about these things. And that's what the internet is great for, isn't it? That a lot of people I've heard say frustratingly, it's just a TikTok trend, but actually what that has done is made it relatable for lots of women that have gone, oh my God, that is exactly me that she is describing, and she has got ADHD, and that's how that is for her. And I know it sounds a bit cliche to maybe walk into your healthcare practitioner and say, I watched this TikTok video, and actually this is me that she's talking about. Let me get access to some support. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Especially not when we think that neurodiverse individuals really struggle to label how they feel.
Absolutely. And what do we call that? I can never say it. Alexithymia. Yeah.
And so therefore, if you can see something that you completely relate to and it sums you up, why wouldn't you use that as a tool to get yourself better healthcare?
Yeah.
So I suppose it's just who you approach, and if the person who you're approaching with that TikTok video or email or message or whatever it might be receives it in the way that it's intended. It's not you just trying to copycat someone or mimic someone else because it's trendy, but it's the best way that you can actually relay your feelings and your innermost kind of thoughts and expressions. And it might be a TikTok video, but so what? Who cares if
it's provided that relatability to allow you to describe, then absolutely go for it.
Yeah. So we're talking about hormones and neurodivergence. So what kind of things do you see in the clinic that maybe is becoming more prevalent or more, obvious out there?
I think so. I am also a trained sexual offences examiner. And unfortunately, there is a statistic in some research that I read, around 90% of autistic females will report being sexually assaulted at some point in their life. And as frightening as that seems, if you are someone who you think you've been sexually assaulted, either whether that's in a current situation or in a previous situation, the Sexual Assault Referral Centre, Willow House, which sits above Choices, although they're not the same service, is there to support you. There's lots of support that you can access, and sometimes these two roles can cross over. Of course, being sexually assaulted can impact your sexual and reproductive health, and you might need to seek additional support for that. So that is, I guess, another thing about raising awareness round about that issue. But the service is there to support you. You can access speaking to someone 24/7 on the helpline, which I can give you the number for. I guess also educating, this has been a huge learning curve for my husband as well, educating partners and fathers or other caregivers around how it might be impacting your home situation. So what I might tend to see with my daughter is that during that week approaching her period, rather than getting reactive, increasing your kind of discipline strategy, we need to do the opposite, because she's very quick to anger sometimes in that last window before her bleed. We just need to meet her where she's at. We maybe need to just lay off a bit of the stricter discipline type thing and just show a bit more compassion and understanding that actually it's not that she's being an aggressive person right now, it's just that she's getting, she's just been overcome by her hormones, and she's far more overstimulated in those situations. And
I wonder, there's the idea out there, and actually I was at boarding school and it did happen in our dormitory. We all kind of synced our periods, right? Yeah. So if that happens at a school,
oh, God help them.
Yeah, A, God help them. But also B, then you could have like a fluctuating homework policy, or you could...
Oh yeah, absolutely. And why do we not have those things? That because, if your executive function is impacted at that time, your ability to study is going to be depleted. And that's it's really difficult.
So if someone does have a diagnosis of neurodiversity and PDD, what is the treatment for that? Is there treatment? Is it?
Yeah, of course. So you could obviously come in and speak to one of our GPs at Choices, who are, they have a good level of understanding around neurodivergence, and I guess it's about looking to stabilise the hormones in that situation, which can be done through using combined hormonal contraception if possible. Not everybody is suitable for that, depending on their risk assessment of other health conditions that they might have, but certainly looking to stabilise the hormone rather than feeling that hormonal fluctuation. Sometimes if you're on treatment, for example, with stimulant medication for your ADHD, sometimes it might be that you need to increase that towards the end of your menstrual cycle. And sometimes people are prescribed antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications to help to balance it. But also knowing, your own quirks in that time is hugely important. So for me, as much as I don't feel like it, if I can get in the C in that last week, the C is very good at rapidly increasing your dopamine, and it tends to last, longer than 5 hours maybe. But cold water therapy is really good for increasing your dopamine level, therefore helping to kind of minimise the impact. But just, if you can, now I like to say that I organise my life round about my menstrual cycle now, which sometimes is true, but I find it very difficult to stick to. But what I tend to do now is, if I'm going to be busy, I can slot things in to my usual working week, like maybe some socials with friends or whatever. Don't be asking me to go out for dinner in the week before my period's due, because the chances are I'm going to panic about it, I'm going to feel overwhelmed, and I'm going to cancel it anyway. But I think I've got a good solid group of friends now who understand that, and I'll just say, look, I feel overwhelmed, or I don't fancy doing this now, even though I agreed to it 3 weeks ago, because I'm not the same person that I was back then. Just minimising your output for that last week can be really helpful, I think. Showing yourself some compassion, because we all talk to ourselves generally very badly. We're our own worst critic, but just being able to pick up on that and name it. So I like to call mine Negative Nancy, and I try and kind of imagine her sitting over there in the corner, and I'll think, okay, Nancy is just trying to protect me here. She's kind of been overly critical. She doesn't want me to get hurt or upset. But right now, I don't need that, Nancy, because I'm I just need you to sit over there and be quiet. So just trying to quiet, and sometimes it's helpful to just name that. I might seem like an absolute raving crazy person by saying this, but it's just helpful to name it and be like, gosh, in here is just kind of getting a wee bit overwhelmed and I'm talking to myself really negatively. But I'm sure you've probably heard of the spoon theory. Yes. So my husband actually got me 10 wooden spoons, and he put little holes, and he made it into a kind of keyring thing that I can hold to represent that actually, if we have 10 wooden spoons every day that we start afresh, where are we spending our wooden spoons? And by the end of the day, even before 10 o'clock, sometimes I'm spent on my spoons depending on what mood my daughter's in, or how late the boys are for school, or whatever it might be, things that you're worrying about. We need to find ways to replenish our spoons, especially in that last week before your period's due. Just try and, be a bit more protective over your spoons, because I think that would be hugely beneficial. But if you can, plan ahead. We're not great at doing that, but try and minimise those kind of, colour them in red in the calendar, whatever that is, but just block it out for the week to concentrate on self-care.
Yeah, go to ground.
Yes, exactly.
Not go to town.
Oh, we should. But no, go to ground, not town. Town's a bad idea. But wouldn't it be great if there was some kind of commune that we could all go to? If all of our periods were to sync.
We should start that.
If anyone wants to fund that's listening, that would be a great place to start.
Apparently you go to the library on the last Tuesday of the month.
Oh, exactly. Come to the library and sync your menstrual cycle. I would say that it's absolutely great that lots of the GP send them kind of updates around, this is the dates for the coming year for the support group in the library. Please come along, refer your patients here, which is great. And some people are taking note. Sometimes people are coming through social prescribing. Oberlin's know about it. There's lots of different places that know that we have this support group. So we are seeing an increase in the people that are accessing the group. And not everybody can come the last Tuesday of the month, but it might be that we add you into the WhatsApp group. And I'm terrible for a WhatsApp group. Sometimes there's like 55 messages in there and I'm like, I cannot look at that. But we all come to the group with that same mindset. And we all feel like it comes to the last Tuesday of the month and we go, I cannot be bothered going to the support group. But actually, what happens is you force yourself to go and you always leave feeling better. Everybody feels a bit, energised. We've all kind of listened to each other's grumbles, moans. We've given each other advice. We've just held space for each other. And it's a really lovely, empowering way to spend a couple of hours.
Swimming, really.
Absolutely,
I really don't want to go in and then you always come out feeling great.
Exactly. You just throw yourself in there.
Laura, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
And a wealth of information. And maybe if our listeners want us to talk about anything else, maybe more in depth, would you be willing to come back?
Yes, absolutely. I'd be delighted to come back. Yes, you've got my email address.
Let us know if you need more information on any particular topic.
It's been amazing. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely.
If there are people out there who are listening and either have similar experience or if there's any success stories as well, so please by all means get in touch. We'd love to hear from you.
Just a quick shout out to EasyDo. Without EasyDo, we wouldn't be able to do this podcast. They've lent us all their tech. We're really grateful.
Thank you.